The phone rang at 12:17 a.m. I was half asleep in my recliner, my left knee throbbing from the cold, when the screen lit up. Emily, my daughter. I answered on the second ring. A dad? Her voice cracked. For a second, I thought something terrible had happened to one of the kids. Emily, what's wrong? There was a long pause. Then I heard her crying. Not the polite kind of crying people do when they're embarrassed. Real crying. Dad, why is your face on every news station? I sat there blinking. The television was still on across the room. The volume was low. Some overnight news program was running. I looked from the screen to the phone and back again. Me, Emily, what are you talking about? You were on Channel 7, then Channel 2. Gary just found another clip online. I rubbed my eyes. My hands still stung from a cut I'd gotten earlier that night. Sweetheart, slow down. She took a shaky breath. Dad, I didn't know. And right there, before she said another word, I knew exactly what she meant. Because 6 hours earlier, my daughter had told me not to come for Christmas. The strange thing is, that wasn't even the worst conversation we'd ever had. Not by a long shot. The worst conversations usually happen quietly. No yelling, no slammed doors, no dramatic speeches. Just a few words that stay with you longer than they should. 3 days earlier, I was sitting at my kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio, paying bills and pretending retirement was as relaxing as everyone says it is. My house was quiet. Too quiet if I'm being honest. My wife and I had divorced 15 years earlier. Since then, I'd learned how to live alone. You learn little routines. You make coffee for one. You eat leftovers for 2 nights instead of 1. You talk to the dog. Then the dog dies and you talk to yourself. Life gets smaller. Not bad, just smaller. The bright spots were always my daughter and my grandkids. At least they used to be. I still remember teaching Emily how to ride a bike in the parking lot behind our church. I remembered sitting through dance recitals that felt longer than some wars. I remembered helping her move into her first apartment, then helping her move out, then helping her move again. That's what fathers do, or at least that's what I thought. My phone rang that afternoon. Emily. I smiled when I saw her name. Hey kiddo. Hi Dad. Something sounded off immediately. Parents know. It doesn't matter if your children are 5 or 35. You know, everything okay? I asked. Yeah, too fast, then silence. I leaned back in my chair. What is it? Another pause. Finally, she said it. Mom and Gary are hosting Christmas this year. Gary. My ex-wife's husband. They'd been married about 6 years. Gary wasn't a monster. That's the thing. Life would actually be easier if he were. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't cruel. He was just the kind of man who always needed to be the most important person in the room. If somebody told a fishing story, Gary caught a bigger fish. If somebody ran a marathon, Gary ran too. If somebody volunteered, Gary volunteered more. After a while, it became exhausting. Still, I kept things civil. For Emily. Always for Emily. Okay, I said. What time should I come over? The line went quiet. That's when I knew. My stomach sank before she even answered. Dad? I stared out the window at the snow piled against the mailbox. Dad, maybe this year. She stopped. Then started again. We're trying to make Gary feel more like part of the family. I didn't say anything. Honestly, I wasn't sure I heard her correctly. So, she cleared her throat. Maybe it'd be better if you sat this Christmas out. The words settled into the room slowly like dust. I looked at the Christmas tree standing in the corner. The same artificial tree I'd owned for almost 20 years. A few ornaments Emily made in elementary school still hung on the lower branches. One was a crooked clay angel. Another was a popsicle stick snowman. I'd kept them all, apparently longer than she'd kept me. Are you there? She asked softly. Yeah. I swallowed. Yeah, I'm here. Dad, please don't take this personally. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because there was absolutely no other way to take it. But I could hear the discomfort in her voice. She already knew she was hurting me. She just wanted permission to do it. So, I gave it to her. I understand, sweetheart. Another silence. Really? Sure. The lie came out smoother than I expected. We talked another minute, nothing important. Then the call ended. I sat there alone. The refrigerator hummed. The furnace kicked on. Outside snow drifted across the street. I stayed at the table for nearly 20 minutes, just sitting, thinking. trying to decide whether I was angry. The truth? I wasn't. Not at first. Mostly I felt tired. Tired in a way that's hard to explain unless you're past 60. Not physically, emotionally. Like you'd spent years carrying something heavy and suddenly realized nobody noticed you were carrying it. The next morning, I went shopping anyway. I bought gifts for the grandkids. A remote control truck for Ethan, an art set for Lily. For Emily, I bought something different. Not expensive, just meaningful. Over the next 2 nights, I sat at my dining room table putting together a photo album. 30 years of memories, birthday parties, school plays, fishing trips, graduations, family vacations, pictures she'd probably forgotten existed. I spent hours organizing them, sometimes smiling, sometimes staring at a photo longer than I should have. By Christmas Eve, the album was finished. I wrapped it carefully. Then I loaded everything into my old Ford pickup. I told myself I was only dropping off gifts, nothing more. No speeches, no guilt trip, no surprise visit, just one last fatherly responsibility. At least that's what I thought. I had no idea that before the night was over, my entire life would be sitting on the evening news. Christmas Eve arrived gray and cold. The kind of Ohio winter day where the sky looks like a sheet of dirty steel and the wind somehow finds its way through every layer of clothing. I woke up around 6. Couldn't sleep anymore. Retirement had done that to me. My body still thought it had a job. I made coffee, fed the birds in the backyard, watched a pair of cardinals fight over the feeder. Then I stared out the kitchen window longer than necessary. I kept looking at my phone, not because I expected Emily to call, because part of me hoped she would. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized how ridiculous the whole thing was. Maybe she'd say, "Dad, forget what I said, just come." The phone stayed silent. Around 10 Clive, I loaded the gifts into my truck. The roads weren't terrible yet. A light snow had started falling, but Dayton had seen worse. I drove across town to Emily's neighborhood, a newer subdivision. Big houses, perfect lawns, the kind of place where every garage looked cleaner than my living room. I pulled into her driveway. For a minute, I just sat there. I could see Christmas decorations through the front window. A giant tree, colored lights, movement inside, people laughing. The grandkids were probably already excited. I imagined Ethan running around in his dinosaur pajamas, Lily showing everyone whatever craft project she'd made at school. I almost got out, almost walked to the front door, almost knocked. Instead, I grabbed the gifts. I carried them to the porch, set them down carefully. Then I added the photo album on top. No note, no message, nothing dramatic, just gifts. I stood there a moment longer. Then I turned around and walked back to my truck. The entire delivery took less than 2 minutes. Still hurt like hell. I drove away before anyone saw me, or maybe before I saw them. Sometimes there's a difference. Back home, I spent the afternoon doing absolutely nothing useful. I watched part of a Browns game from years ago, one I'd already seen. Then I heated up some leftover barbecue from a place downtown. The ribs were dry. The coleslaw tasted like refrigerator. I ate it anyway. Around 4, I pulled out a box of old DVD. Years earlier, I'd converted a bunch of family videotapes. Emily as a kid, birthday parties, school events, vacations. I slid one into the player. The screen flickered. Suddenly, there she was. 8 years old, missing 2 front teeth, riding a bike for the first time. "Don't let go," she shouted. "You got it," my younger voice answered. Then I immediately let go. She pedaled 20 feet before realizing she was alone. The look of pride on her face nearly broke me. I watched another hour, then another. By evening, the house felt smaller than usual. The Christmas tree glowed quietly in the corner. A little artificial thing I'd assembled myself. Nothing impressive, but enough. Snorts around 7:30, I considered doing something stupid. I thought about driving back. Not to start an argument, not to force my way into dinner, just to see the kids. Maybe wave through the window. Maybe leave after 5 minutes. I actually put on my coat, got my keys, walked to the front door, then stopped. Because if someone has to beg for a seat at your table, the seat isn't really theirs anymore. I hung the coat back up. That decision hurt, but it also felt strangely peaceful. A little after 8, my phone buzzed. Not Emily. A text from the community warming center. Winter weather was getting worse. Volunteer help might be needed. I volunteered there a few times a month. Nothing heroic. Just helping folks stay warm during rough weather. Making coffee, moving supplies, listening to lonely people talk. Sometimes that's enough. I texted back, on my way. The center sat in an old church building downtown. When I arrived, the place was busy. Several homeless men had come in from the cold. A couple elderly residents from an apartment complex had lost heat temporarily. People were drinking coffee, watching television, trying to stay warm. For the next 2 hours, I did what needed doing. Moved folding tables, carried blankets, fixed a stubborn thermostat, made bad jokes, the usual. By 10:30, things had settled down. The snow outside was falling harder now. The roads were getting slick. I said goodnight and headed home. The storm had picked up fast. Visibility wasn't great. My windshield wipers worked overtime. I drove carefully. No rush. Nobody waiting for me anyway. About 15 minutes later, I spotted headlights at an odd angle ahead. At first, I thought it was a disabled vehicle. Then I got closer and realized it was a church shuttle bus. The front end had slid off the road and into a ditch. Not a major crash, but serious enough. The vehicle leaned awkwardly, hazard lights flashing, snow blowing sideways across the highway shoulder. I pulled over immediately, grabbed the emergency flashers, called 911. Then I got out. The wind hit me like a punch. Inside the bus, I could see movement. Mostly older passengers, a church group as it turned out. People returning from a holiday event. Several looked frightened. One woman was crying. Another man appeared injured. The driver was trying to calm everyone down. I climbed aboard. "I'm David," I said. "Help is coming." That simple sentence to lower the panic level immediately. Years working utility emergencies had taught me something important. People can handle bad news. What they struggle with is uncertainty. I moved through the bus checking on people, helping where I could. Then something caught my attention. A damaged utility pole nearby. Not fully down, but damaged enough to concern me. A power line had dropped lower than it should have. Not touching the bus yet, but close enough that I didn't like it. Very close. I immediately told everyone to stay exactly where they were. No wandering around outside. No climbing into the ditch. No trying to walk home. The driver listened. Thank God. A few minutes later, I helped 2 elderly women step carefully off the bus, once first responders deemed it safe. One of them was shaking badly. I gave her one of the emergency blankets from my truck. The other kept apologizing for being slow. I told her she reminded me of my aunt. That made her laugh. Then my boot hit black ice. I went down hard. My left knee twisted underneath me. Pain shot up my leg. For a moment I couldn't breathe. A firefighter helped me up. "You okay?" "Depends how old you think I am." He laughed. I didn't because my knee felt about 90. By the time EMTs fully secured the scene, my hand was bleeding from a deep scrape and my knee was swelling. Nothing life-threatening, just enough to remind me that I wasn't 30 anymore. A local TV crew arrived shortly afterward. One reporter wandered around filming. She asked me a couple questions. I answered without thinking much about it. I was cold, tired, ready to go home. The last thing on my mind was television. Eventually, an EMT convinced me to let them check my knee. I sat in the back of an ambulance while snow continued falling outside. The reporter was still filming. The church passengers were finally safe, and somewhere across town, my daughter was probably opening gifts around a warm Christmas tree. I had no idea one of those gifts was about to change everything. The EMT wanted me to go to the hospital. I wanted my own bed. We compromised. They cleaned the cut on my hand, wrapped it, checked my knee, and gave me a list of reasons I should seek further treatment if things got worse. By the time I got home, it was a little after midnight. The snow was still coming down. Not as hard as before, but enough to turn the neighborhood into a quiet white postcard. Most houses were dark. Christmas Eve was ending. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. The house felt exactly the same as it had a few hours earlier. Quiet still, a little lonely. I kicked off my boots and lowered myself carefully into my recliner. My knee protested immediately. Yeah, I muttered. Me too. The television was still on. Some local station was running overnight coverage of the storm. I wasn't paying attention. I closed my eyes for what I thought would be a minute. Then my phone exploded. Buzz, 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 buzz. I opened one eye. Several text messages, 3 missed calls. More notifications arriving every few seconds. For a moment, I thought something had happened to a family member. Then Emily called. I answered immediately. Dad? She sounded different. Not nervous, not awkward, shaken. Emily, what's wrong? A long silence. Then I heard her crying. Dad, why is your face on every news station? I sat upright. What? You're on TV. What are you talking about? You were helping those people. I looked toward the television. The local news station had replayed footage from the accident scene. And there I was, standing beside the bus, snow blowing across the road, looking older than I felt. And honestly, I felt pretty old. The station replayed the clip again, then another angle, then another. Apparently, the story had become one of the major local Christmas stories of the evening. Emily, I said slowly, everyone's okay. That's what matters. But she wasn't talking about the accident. I could tell. Something else had happened. Then she asked, why didn't you tell me where you were? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because 6 hours earlier, she had told me exactly where not to be. I didn't think it mattered. That answer hit harder than I intended. Silence filled the line again. Finally, she whispered, Dad. Then she stopped, like she couldn't figure out what came next. Eventually, she said, good night. The call ended awkwardly. No apology, not yet, no explanation either. Just confusion. I set my phone down. 2 minutes later, it rang again. This time it was Linda, my ex-wife. I stared at the screen before answering. Hello? David. She sounded uncomfortable, which was unusual. Linda rarely sounded uncomfortable. I just saw the news. Okay. Are you hurt? That question caught me off guard. Nothing serious. Good. Then silence. Long silence. Finally, she said, Emily's upset. I looked toward the TV. The station was replaying the footage again. I imagine she is, Linda sighed. The kind of sigh people use when they're realizing a situation isn't going away. Maybe give her some time. I wasn't planning to do anything else. Another silence. Then she quietly said good night. The call ended. 5 minutes later, Gary called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Curiosity won. His voice was unusually cheerful. Quite a night, huh? I leaned back. Apparently, I just wanted to say that was really something. There it was. The Gary I knew, always eager to insert himself into whatever conversation was happening. Not malicious, just incapable of staying on the sidelines. He kept talking. About the storm, about local news, about how crazy everything was. Then finally, Emily feels terrible. I said nothing. Gary filled the silence. She didn't mean to hurt you. Still nothing. Because whether she meant to or not wasn't really the point anymore. Eventually, he gave up and ended the call. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of messages. Former co-workers, old neighbors, people from church, folks I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had apparently seen the story. I spent the morning answering texts. Nothing dramatic. Mostly variations of glad you're okay, or saw you on TV. Then around noon, something changed. A former coworker sent me a link. Have you seen this? I clicked. The video wasn't about the rescue. Not exactly. It was a short clip from the reporter's interview. Just 20 seconds. 20 seconds that somehow had thousands of views already. The reporter stood beside me near the ambulance. Snow blowing everywhere. She asked, do you have family waiting for you tonight? I remembered the moment. Barely. At the time, I'd been cold, tired, and distracted. My answer had been honest. Nothing more. In the video, I smiled. A tired smile. Then I said, not tonight. The reporter looked surprised. No Christmas plans? I shook my head. My daughter asked me not to come this year. That was it. That was the entire clip. 20 seconds. No anger, no blame, no bitterness. Just the truth. Yet people couldn't stop sharing it. Comments poured in underneath. Thousands of them. People telling their own stories. Stories about divorce. Stories about estranged children. Stories about spending holidays alone. Many weren't even talking about the rescue. They were talking about that sentence. One sentence, one painful little truth. By afternoon, local radio stations were discussing it. Community Facebook pages were sharing it. Neighbors were commenting. People I'd never met were arguing about it. The whole thing felt surreal. I hated it. And yet, part of me understood why it resonated. Because loneliness after 50 isn't something many people talk about. Not honestly, especially fathers. We talk about sports, weather, politics, knee replacements. We don't usually talk about being left out, not directly. Around 4 out, my phone buzzed again. A text from Emily, just 3 words. Can we talk? I stared at the message, then set the phone down. Not because I was angry, because I genuinely didn't know what to say. A few minutes later, another text arrived. This one was longer. Dad, I just found the photo album. The final page made my chest tighten, because I knew exactly which page she meant. The last page, the handwritten note, the one I'd written while sitting alone at my kitchen table. No matter where I spend Christmas, you'll always be my little girl. For several minutes, I simply stared at the screen. Then another notification arrived. This time from a local journalist. She wanted to interview me. Not about the rescue, about my life, about the volunteer work, about the man behind the story. And suddenly I had a feeling this whole thing was only getting started. The first thing I did was ignore the journalist. Not forever, just for a day. Maybe 2. At 62 years old, I'd learned that not every ringing phone deserved an answer, especially when half the people calling suddenly seemed fascinated by my existence. The rescue itself wasn't bothering me. The attention was. I wasn't comfortable being the center of anything, never had been. When you've spent most of your life working utility emergencies, people usually only notice you when something goes wrong. You fix the problem. You go home. Nobody throws a parade because the lights came back on. That's just the job. The journalist called again the next morning, then sent an email, then left another voicemail. Finally, I called her back, mostly because I was tired of listening to my phone buzz. Her name was Rachel Bennett, 30-something. Worked for a local Dayton newspaper. She sounded professional, polite, not sensational. Mr. Walker, thanks for calling. It's David. David, I'd love to talk with you. I already told the TV station what happened. I'm actually not interested in the accident. That got my attention. What are you interested in? The people who keep mentioning you. I frowned. What people? The people I've been interviewing. Apparently, while I was busy trying to disappear, Rachel had been making calls. Lots of calls. Former co-workers, church members, neighbors, people from the warming center, the bus driver, even a few passengers from the accident. And according to Rachel, they all kept telling stories. Stories I didn't know they remembered. One neighbor talked about the time I'd repaired her furnace for free during a January cold snap. A former co-worker mentioned a scholarship fund I'd quietly helped support at a local trade school. The director of the warming center told Rachel I'd volunteered there for nearly 12 years. 12. I honestly hadn't realized it had been that long. One story after another. Nothing heroic, just ordinary things. The kind of things people do when they believe helping someone is easier than listening to them suffer. Rachel wanted to write about that. I told her no. She asked why. Because none of it matters, she laughed. Actually, I think that's exactly why it matters. That answer irritated me because it sounded smarter than mine. We ended up talking for almost 40 minutes. Afterward, I felt strangely exhausted. Like I'd spent the afternoon defending myself against compliments. A few days later, her article appeared online. Then in print, I expected a handful of readers. Instead, it spread even faster than the rescue story. Apparently, people like stories about old men who minded their own business. Who knew? Meanwhile, life kept getting weirder. Emily texted every day, not constantly, just little messages. Checking on my knee, asking about my hand. Trying to start conversations, I answered politely. But something had changed, not out of revenge, not because I wanted to punish her. I simply didn't feel the same urgency anymore. For years, I'd been the one reaching out, the one making plans, the one checking in. Now I stopped, and for the first time she seemed to notice. One afternoon, she called while I was replacing a broken shelf in my garage. Hi, Dad. Hey, you busy? A little. There was a pause. Then, can we get lunch sometime? I tightened a bolt. Maybe. The words surprised both of us. Emily wasn't used to hearing maybe from me. For years, my answer had always been yes. I could hear her processing that. Not angry, just confused. Eventually, we ended the conversation. No argument, no breakthrough, just reality. A few days later, another story appeared. This one wasn't about me. It was about Gary, sort of. One local television station interviewed several people connected to the rescue story. Somehow Gary ended up in the segment. That wasn't entirely shocking. Gary had a talent for finding cameras. The man could probably locate a news crew in a cornfield. During the interview, he described me as a great friend of the family. Then he talked about how close everyone was, how supportive we'd all been, how important family values were. The usual Gary stuff. The problem wasn't what he said. The problem was what happened next. Emily happened to be standing nearby. The reporter asked her a simple question. Clears throat. Did your father always volunteer like this? Nothing dangerous, nothing controversial. But Emily hesitated. Just for a second. A tiny hesitation. Most viewers probably missed it. Rachel Bennett didn't. The internet certainly didn't. Within hours, people started connecting dots. Not aggressively, not like some online mob. Just naturally. If everyone was so close, why had David spent Christmas alone? The question kept appearing. Nobody had a good answer. Especially not Emily. Especially not Gary. And for the first time, Gary seemed uncomfortable. I didn't enjoy that. At least I don't think I did. The truth is more complicated. Part of me felt guilty watching it unfold. Another part remembered sitting alone in my kitchen while everyone else celebrated Christmas. Human beings aren't always noble. Sometimes we're both things at once. A week after New Year's, Rachel called again. You're not going to like this. Then why are you calling? She laughed. Because you're being honored. I nearly hung up. No, yes, no, David. I sighed. What now? The city was organizing a community recognition event. Dayton heroes of the season. Local volunteers, first responders, teachers, charity workers, people who had contributed to the community during the holidays. Apparently my name was on the list. I tried declining twice, maybe 3 times. The city refused, which seemed unfair. By then I learned something important. When enough people decide you're a hero, your opinion becomes surprisingly irrelevant. A formal invitation arrived in the mail the following week. I set it aside, forgot about it. Then Rachel called again. You should probably attend. Why? Because I just learned something interesting. I rubbed my forehead. What? There was a pause. Then she said, Gary's business association is sponsoring one of the event tables. I sat quietly. Okay, Emily and her family will probably be there. The room suddenly felt smaller. Not because I was nervous, because I knew life well enough to recognize what was coming. Sooner or later, all unfinished conversations demand payment. And after Christmas, there were plenty of unfinished conversations waiting for us. The event was scheduled for the first weekend in February, less than 3 weeks away. Neither Emily nor I knew exactly what would happen when we saw each other again. But for the first time since Christmas Eve, I found myself unable to sleep. Because something told me the hardest part of the story hadn't happened yet. By the time February arrived, my knee had mostly healed. Mostly. It still reminded me of its existence every morning. Getting older is funny that way. You stop measuring time by calendars and start measuring it by which body part hurts when you get out of bed. The community recognition event was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the Dayton Civic Center. I almost didn't go. Twice. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for nearly 2 weeks. Every time I walked past it, I found another excuse. Too much attention, too many people, too awkward, too unnecessary. But eventually, I ran out of excuses. Around 5 that evening, I put on a navy blazer I hadn't worn in years. The sleeves felt tighter than I remembered. Or maybe I was wider than I remembered. Could have been either. I drove downtown and parked across the street. The February air was cold enough to sting. Inside, the lobby buzzed with conversation. Local politicians, teachers, volunteer groups, police officers, firefighters, families. people shaking hands and pretending not to look at name tags. My kind of nightmare. A volunteer handed me a program. "Congratulations, Mr. Walker." I smiled politely. "Thank you." Then I immediately looked for the nearest coffee station. Some habits never die. I was pouring a cup when I spotted them. Emily, Gary, Linda, the kids, standing near one of the sponsor tables. For a moment, nobody moved. The distance between us couldn't have been more than 30 feet. Yet, it felt much farther. Emily saw me first. Her expression changed instantly. Nervous, hopeful, guilty, all at the same time. I lifted a hand, small wave, nothing dramatic. She waved back. Gary nodded. Linda offered a tentative smile. Then the crowd shifted and blocked the view. Part of me was relieved. The event began shortly afterward. A local television personality acted as host. Various awards were handed out. New teachers, volunteer coaches, foster parents, people who genuinely deserve recognition. I spent most of the evening hoping my category would be skipped. No such luck. Eventually, the host walked onto the stage holding a card. "Our next honoree is someone who reminded this community what quiet service looks like." I immediately considered leaving through a side exit. Too late. The giant screen behind him lit up. Pictures appeared. Me at the warming center. Me helping with a trade school fundraiser. Me standing beside the church shuttle bus. The audience applauded. I wanted the floor to open beneath my chair. The host continued. "For over a decade, he has volunteered without seeking attention. Most of us never knew his name until recently." I glanced toward the back of the room. No escape route seemed practical. A minute later, they called me to the stage. The applause grew louder. I hated every second of it, and somehow appreciated it at the same time. Human beings are complicated. I walked up the stairs carefully. My knee still wasn't thrilled about sudden movement. The host shook my hand, asked a few questions, simple ones. How long had I volunteered? Why did I do it? What motivated me? Easy enough. Then came the question, the one I would remember for years. The host smiled. "David, everyone has heard about the rescue, but looking back, what was the hardest part of that entire night?" The room became quiet. I expected to give a safe answer. Something about weather, something about fear, something polite. Instead, the truth came out. Not planned, not rehearsed, just honest. I looked at the audience, then down at the floor, then back up again. Helping those folks wasn't the hardest part. The room stayed silent. The firefighters got there fast. The EMTs did their job. Everyone worked together. I paused. A few seconds, no more. The hardest part was realizing my daughter thought someone else deserved my place at Christmas. Silence. Complete silence. The kind that only happens when nobody knows what to do with what they just heard. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't blamed anyone, hadn't even said names. Yet everyone understood, including Emily. I saw her immediately. Her hands covered her mouth, tears running down her face. Not dramatic crying, the quiet kind, the painful kind, the kind people tried desperately to hide. For a moment, I regretted saying it, not because it wasn't true, because truth has weight, and once you put it into the world, you can't pull it back. The host looked stunned. Then, to his credit, he handled it perfectly. He simply nodded. "Thank you for your honesty." Nothing more. No follow-up. No attempt to create television drama. The audience applauded, softly at first, then louder, not for the comment, for the honesty behind it. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. When it finally ended, people approached from every direction. Handshakes, pictures, conversations. More attention than I'd received in the previous 10 years combined. Eventually, I escaped toward the lobby. I was halfway to the exit when I heard Dad. I stopped. Emily stood behind me, alone. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around me, the same way she used to when she was little, the same way she hadn't in years. I hugged her back, because despite everything, she was still my daughter. When she stepped away, her eyes were red. "I am so sorry." No excuses, no explanations, no mention of Gary, no mention of her mother, just 4 words, "I am so sorry." The sincerity hit harder than any speech could have. I nodded. "Thank you," she looked confused. "That's all?" I smiled sadly. "What else is there?" More tears. Then, "Can we fix this?" I thought about that, really thought about it, for longer than she expected. Finally I answered, maybe. The same word I'd given her weeks earlier. Maybe. Not no, not yes. Maybe. Because forgiveness can happen quickly. Trust usually doesn't. Emily understood immediately. I could see it on her face. For once, she wasn't asking for instant repair. She knew there would be work, real work, the kind relationships require. We talked for another 15 minutes, calmly, honestly. No fighting, no miracles, just a beginning. When we finally said goodbye, I noticed Gary standing across the lobby. He didn't approach, didn't interrupt, didn't try to explain himself. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed to understand that not every situation required his voice. And strangely enough, that might have been the wisest thing he'd ever done. As I walked toward the parking lot, snowflakes drifted through the streetlights. The same way they had on Christmas Eve, only this time something felt different. The story wasn't finished, but it had finally changed direction. People like clean endings. I understand why. Clean endings feel good. A person apologizes. Another person forgives. Everybody hugs. Roll credits. Real life is rarely that tidy. After the recognition event, Emily and I didn't suddenly become the perfect father and daughter again. She didn't come over every Sunday with fresh cookies. I didn't pretend Christmas never happened. We moved slowly, carefully, like two people stepping across thin ice. The first week after the event, she called twice. I answered both times. We talked about normal things. The kids, her job, my knee, the weather, nothing heavy. The second week, she asked if she could bring Ethan and Lily over for lunch. I said yes. Then I spent the whole morning cleaning a house that wasn't dirty. I vacuumed twice, wiped the counters, bought juice boxes, picked up the little crackers Lily liked. Then at 11:30, Emily texted, "Ethan has a cough. Can we reschedule?" I stared at that message longer than I should have. Old habits came back fast. The old disappointment, the old excuse-making, the old voice in my head saying, "Don't make a big deal out of it." But this time, I didn't answer right away. I waited, made coffee, sat down, then typed, "Sure, let me know when you have another date." That was it. No guilt, no extra sweetness, no pretending I wasn't disappointed. Just a boundary. A small one, but mine. Over the next few months, I made several changes. Quiet changes, practical changes. The kind nobody sees until they matter. I met with my attorney, a calm woman named Denise Porter, whose office smelled like coffee and printer ink. We reviewed my will, my power of attorney, my beneficiary forms, everything I'd been meaning to update for years. Denise asked careful questions. "Are you making these changes out of anger?" I appreciated that. "No," I said, out of clarity. She nodded. That answer seemed to satisfy her. I didn't cut Emily out. That would have been cruel. And honestly, it wasn't what I wanted. But I changed things. Part of my would still go to her. Part would go to Ethan and Lily in a trust for school. And part would go to the warming center and the local trade school scholarship fund. For years, I'd treated my family like the only proof my life mattered. That was my mistake. They mattered. Of course they did. But they weren't the only ones. A month later, Emily asked me for help with a car down payment. Not a huge amount, but enough. In the old days, I would have said yes before she finished asking. This time, I asked questions. "What happened to the money you and Mark had saved?" She sighed. "Gary suggested we put it into that rental property deal." There it was. Gary again. I closed my eyes for a second, not because I was angry, because I was tired. "Emily, I can't do that." Silence. "Then you can't?" "No." Another silence. "Is this because of Christmas?" "No," I said. "It's because I'm retired and I need to stop solving problems I didn't create." That landed. I heard it. She didn't argue. She just whispered, "Okay." I expected resentment. Maybe there was some, but a week later she called again, not for money, just to talk. That was the first real sign things might change. Spring came slowly that year. Snow melted from the edges of the driveway. Birds returned to the feeder. Eek. My knee still ached when rain moved in, but I stopped complaining about it. Mostly, I kept volunteering. The warming center shifted back to regular outreach work. Food drives, repair days, paperwork help for folks who didn't know where to start. One afternoon, I saw a familiar face walk through the door. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, 78 years old. one of the women from the shuttle bus that Christmas Eve. She had white hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that said she'd spent her life refusing to be pitied. She pointed at me. "You." I looked behind me. "Me? Don't act cute. You're the man who kept telling me not to apologize for walking slow." I laughed. "Well, you were apologizing too much." She started visiting the center every Thursday after that. Not because she needed help, because she wanted to help. She organized donated coats with the seriousness of a military operation. If someone put children's mittens in the adult glove bin, Eleanor corrected them like they'd committed a federal offense. I liked her immediately. Emily met her once. It was awkward at first. Then Eleanor shook Emily's hand and said, "Your father is stubborn, but useful." Emily laughed. I did too. That laugh felt like a small repair. Not a full one, but enough to notice. By early summer, Emily and I were having dinner once a month. Just us. No Gary, no Linda, no pressure. Sometimes we talked about old memories. Sometimes we talked about what went wrong. The first few conversations were uncomfortable. She admitted something one evening over meatloaf at a diner in Kettering. "I think I was trying so hard not to upset Mom that I forgot I was hurting you. I cut a piece of meatloaf." "That sounds about right." She winced. I didn't soften it. Not because I wanted to hurt her, because truth spoken gently is still allowed to be truth. She nodded. "I know." That was enough for the moment. In August, a letter arrived from the state. Ohio Senior Volunteer Recognition Award. At first, I thought it was junk mail. Then Rachel Bennett called and told me it wasn't. Apparently, the city had submitted my name. The ceremony would be in Columbus. Formal event. One invited guest. I knew what everyone expected. Even Emily expected it. She didn't ask directly, but I could hear hope in her voice when I mentioned the invitation. "That's wonderful, Dad." "Yeah, strange but wonderful. Do you know who you're taking?" There it was, the question. I looked out at my backyard, at the bird feeder, at the empty patio chair where my old dog used to nap. Then I said, "I do." A pause. "Oh, not angry, just quiet. I'm taking Eleanor." Another pause, then Emily surprised me. "That's good, Dad." I could hear the sadness, but also the understanding. She should be there. And that was the moment I knew we might actually be all right someday. Not because she got what she wanted, because she accepted what she didn't. The ceremony in Columbus was nicer than I expected. Eleanor wore a blue dress and complained about the parking for 20 minutes. During the event, when they called my name, she squeezed my arm. "Don't trip," she whispered. "Thank you for the support. Anytime." I walked onto that stage with a sore knee, a wider waist than I had at 40, and a heart that had finally stopped chasing the wrong kind of approval. Afterward, Eleanor and I ate dinner at a little place near German Village. She ordered pie. I ordered coffee. We talked about ordinary things: weather, family, bad drivers, good soup. On the drive back to Dayton, my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Proud of you, Dad." I smiled, then put the phone away. Not because I didn't care, because I finally knew I didn't need a message from my daughter to make the night mean something. That was the revenge I never planned. No screaming, no public takedown, no ruined holiday dinner. Just one old man learning that love should not require begging. I still love my daughter. I always will. But I no longer mistake being needed for being valued. And I don't save seats for people who only remember mine when the cameras are on. Sometimes family forgets your worth until strangers remind them. If you've ever been overlooked by people you gave your life to, I hope you know this. You still matter. And if this story stayed with you, share your own in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear it. I am Thomas, 70 years old, and somehow still healing from the wounds my own family inflicted. As a retired structural engineer, I spent my life building strong foundations, completely unaware that my own son was plotting a fatal collapse. 5 months after my wife died, I took her broken smart glasses in for a simple repair. The technician locked his shop doors, pulled me into a back room, and whispered, "Check the will right now before you are next." I stood frozen, watching the terrifying video he recovered from her glasses. And in that dark room, my grief turned into a cold, calculated plan for revenge. Before I continue this story, Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Now, let me tell you how a simple errand uncovered a nightmare. For 40 years, I worked in Chicago building things meant to last. I understand stress fractures, load-bearing walls, and the invisible forces that cause a structure to collapse. I always believed my family was built on solid bedrock. I provided everything for my wife Martha and our son Derek. I paid for his Ivy League education, funded his lavish wedding to his wife Rachel, and stepped back to enjoy my retirement, trusting that my legacy was secure. 5 months ago, that foundation cracked. Martha passed away. The doctors called it a sudden and massive heart attack. It happened on a Tuesday evening while I was downtown at a charity board meeting. By the time I rushed back to our house, the paramedics were already shaking their heads. Derek and Rachel had been visiting her that evening. They told me she just collapsed clutching her chest and that it happened too fast for anyone to do anything. I accepted it. Death is the one structural failure no engineer can calculate or prevent. But Martha had been struggling before she died. She was in the early stages of memory loss. She would forget her keys, lose her way on her morning walks, and get frustrated with the fading reliability of her own mind. To help her maintain her independence, I bought her a pair of custom smart glasses. They looked like ordinary designer frames, but they had a discreet built-in camera. It was designed to record her daily routes and sync to a private cloud, so if she ever got lost, she could literally retrace her steps. The paramedics had handed me her personal items in a plastic bag that night. Her wedding ring, her watch, and those glasses. The right lens was cracked from where she hit the floor. I could not bring myself to look at them for months. The grief was too heavy a suffocating weight that made me avoid anything that reminded me of her absence. Yesterday morning, I finally found the strength to open that plastic bag. I decided I wanted the glasses fixed to keep them as a memento. I drove to a small tech repair shop owned by Leo Mitchell. Leo is a brilliant kid, a software wizard I had known since he was a teenager. I helped pay for his college tuition when his own father walked out on him, and he always treated Martha and me like family. The bell above the door chimed as I walked into the dusty electronics fill shop. Leo looked up from his workbench and smiled. I handed him the glasses and explained that I just wanted the cracked lens replaced and the internal memory wiped clean so I could safely store them away. I expected him to take them, give me a receipt, and tell me to come back tomorrow. Instead, the moment Leo recognized the specific serial number on the smart frames, his entire demeanor changed. The smile vanished from his face. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. He looked past me, staring out the front window of the shop as if checking to see if anyone had followed me. Without saying a single word, Leo walked past me, flipped the open sign to closed, pulled the heavy security blinds down over the glass, and turned the deadbolt. A loud, heavy click echoed in the quiet shop. "What is going on, Leo?" I asked, my voice tight with confusion. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me toward the back room where he kept his secure servers. He shut the door behind us, plunging the small room into shadows, illuminated only by the glow of his computer monitors. He looked at me, his hands physically trembling as he held Martha's glasses. "Mr. Caldwell," he whispered, his voice shaking, "you need to check your wife's will right now before you are next." I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "Before I am next," I asked, "what does that mean? What are you talking about?" Leo did not answer. He sat down at his terminal, plugged a specialized decryption cable into the hidden port on the glasses, and began typing furiously. He explained that a few weeks after Martha died, he had run a routine diagnostic sweep on his cloud servers, the servers that hosted the backup data for her glasses. He had noticed a massive anomaly. A huge file corruption occurred right around the exact time of her death. Someone had tried to remotely wipe the glasses and the cloud backup simultaneously, but they were sloppy. They did not know Leo had built a shadow directory into the hardware for emergency recovery. I froze as he hit the enter key. A progress bar flashed on the screen, piecing together shattered fragments of data. I managed to reconstruct the raw video file from the physical memory cache inside the frames. Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper. I did not know what to do. I have been terrified to call you. I did not know who to trust. Just watch. The screen flickered to life. It was a first-person perspective recorded directly from the camera resting on the bridge of Martha's nose. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it was the exact date and time of her death. The video was shaky, but the resolution was clear. I was looking through my dead wife's eyes. She was in our kitchen. I saw her hands frail and trembling, reaching out toward the marble countertop. I heard her breath, ragged and shallow, struggling to pull air into her lungs. It was the terrifying sound of a woman experiencing acute heart failure. The camera angle shifted violently downward as Martha collapsed to the hardwood floor. The impact cracked the lens, leaving a jagged spiderweb fracture across the left side of the screen. Through that fractured view, 2 pairs of shoes stepped into the frame, the expensive polished Italian leather loafers and a pair of designer heels. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. Standing directly over my dying wife were my son Derek and his wife Rachel. They were not panicking. They were not reaching for their phones to call for an ambulance. They were not kneeling down to help her. They were just standing there looking down at her with an absolute terrifying calmness. Martha let out a desperate wheezing gasp. Her hand reached up weakly, pointing toward the counter. Her voice was faint, agonizing to listen. To the medicine, she whispered. My pills. Rachel stepped forward. Her pristine manicured hand reached out and picked up the small orange prescription bottle of Martha's emergency heart medication from the counter. I watched, paralyzed by a sickening horror as Rachel unscrewed the cap, looked down at my gasping wife, and simply turned away, keeping the pills completely out of reach. Derek crouched down. His face filled the camera's view. My own son, the boy I had raised and protected, looking into his dying mother's eyes with a cold, empty stare. He leaned in close, his lips parted as if he was about to speak. But before he could say a word, the video violently stuttered. The image scrambled into a chaotic mess of digital noise and static, and the screen went completely black. I stood there in the dark room, my lungs burning. I had stopped breathing. The silence in the repair shop was deafening, broken only by the hum of the computer servers. It cuts out right there, Leo whispered, breaking the silence. The impact from the fall damaged the internal drive, and whoever tried to wipe the data corrupted the audio in the final seconds. The encryption is incredibly deep. I have been running algorithms for weeks, but I need more time to recover the rest of the file and clean up the audio so we can hear exactly what he said. My mind was a chaotic storm. The structural integrity of my entire reality had just been obliterated. My wife did not just die of a heart attack. She was murdered by our own son and his wife. They stood there and watched her suffocate deliberately, withholding the medication that would have saved her life. And now they were pretending to mourn her. Why, I thought my fists clenching so hard my knuckles turned white. Why would they do this? Check the will. Leo had said before you are next. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of my cell phone shattered the tension in the room. I jumped, pulling it from my pocket. The caller ID glowed brightly in the dim light. It was Derek. I stared at his name on the screen, the name of the man who had stood over my dying wife. My thumb hovered over the accept button. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing the violent rage down into a cold, locked box inside my mind. I answered the call and brought the phone to my ear. Hey, Dad. Derek's voice echoed through the speaker. It was sickeningly sweet, laced with that fake practiced warmth he used with his clients. Rachel and I are coming over to the house right now. We need to pick you up and take you to the lawyer to sign those power of attorney papers. Your memory is getting worse lately, Dad. You need us to step in and handle everything for you. See you in 20 minutes. He hung up before I could say a word. I lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with terrifying clarity. My son had killed his mother, and now he was coming for me. I slipped the phone into my pocket. The cold metal grounded me against the storm raging in my chest. I looked at Leo. The young man was pale, his eyes wide with fear. I placed a steady hand on his shoulder, letting him know I was in absolute control. "Keep working on decrypting the rest of that audio file," I told him, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Back up everything to a secure offline drive, and do not answer your phone for anyone but me. I will handle my son." I stepped out of the repair shop and into the brisk autumn air. I had exactly 15 minutes before they arrived. As a structural engineer, I had spent my entire 40-year career evaluating immense physical loads, calculating exactly how much relentless pressure a solid steel support beam could take before it finally snapped. I had to apply that exact same cold, unforgiving mathematics to my own mind right now. I could not let the crushing grief or the blinding fury show. I had to become the very thing they truly believed I was. A weak, confused, deeply grieving old man whose mind was steadily slipping away into the fog. I let my shoulders slump forward, completely altering my posture. I purposely slowed my breathing, making it shallow and slightly labored. I relaxed the muscles in my face, letting a vacant, lost expression settle heavily over my features. Right on time, a sleek black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. The heavily tinted passenger window rolled down, revealing Derek in the driver's seat, gripping the hand-stitched leather steering wheel. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the wildly successful investment banker he portrayed to the world. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, turning to give me a bright, flawlessly practiced smile that made my stomach physically churn with absolute disgust. "Oh, Dad, we were so terribly worried about you," Rachel cooed quickly, opening her heavy car door and stepping out onto the pavement to gently help me inside. "Why are you walking around this busy part of town all by yourself? You know, you get easily disoriented these days." I let my hands tremble slightly as I reached out to take her offered arm. "I was just getting your mother's glasses fixed," I mumbled deliberately, slurring my words just a fraction to properly sell the performance. "I thought maybe she would want them back." Rachel exchanged a quick, highly revealing look with Derek, a look that clearly screamed, "The old man is rapidly losing his mind." She gently guided me into the spacious back seat, treating me like a fragile piece of antique glass that was already cracking under the immense pressure. Derek pulled the massive SUV away from the curb, seamlessly merging into the heavy afternoon traffic. He adjusted his rear-view mirror just enough so he could make direct eye contact with me while he drove. He had always been a remarkably smooth talker, an absolute master at selling highly toxic financial assets to wealthy clients who simply did not know any better. Now, he was ruthlessly applying those exact same boardroom manipulation tactics to his own father. "Dad, we really need to sit down and talk seriously about the future." Derek began, his tone dripping with manufactured concern. "I was reviewing the estate documents this morning with the legal team. Mom's final medical bills are incredibly complicated. The hospital is sending massive invoices that do not make any sense, and the insurance company is giving us the runaround. It is rapidly becoming a massive administrative headache for everyone involved." I stared aimlessly out the tinted window, carefully keeping my expression entirely blank and unresponsive. "Bills," I whispered, sounding incredibly distant and thoroughly confused. "I can just write a check, Derek. We have plenty of money in the accounts. We do not need to worry about paying medical bills. That is exactly the root of the problem," Dad Dirk said smoothly, casually tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. "You have $40 million sitting in various trust accounts, real estate properties, and liquid assets. It is a massive, highly complex portfolio. But without Mom here to legally co-manage things, the imminent tax liabilities are going to be absolutely disastrous. And honestly, Dad, Rachel and I are getting deeply worried about you living all alone in that big house." "Worried about me?" I asked, letting a pathetic note of feeble confusion perfectly enter my fragile voice. Rachel turned around completely in her seat, resting her perfectly manicured hand affectionately on my knee. "Yes, Thomas?" she said softly. Her voice was like smooth velvet draped over shattered glass. "You have not been yourself since Martha passed away. You are constantly forgetting things. You wander off without telling anyone. The intense grief is taking a terrible visible toll on your cognitive health. We just want to protect you. There are so many ruthless scammers out there who specifically prey on vulnerable seniors with large unprotected estates. We simply cannot bear the thought of someone taking advantage of you when you are this fragile." The breathtaking hypocrisy of her empty words almost made me completely break character. They were the ruthless scammers. They were the absolute predators hiding in this vehicle. But I simply nodded slowly, looking down at my visibly trembling hands. "What do you want me to do?" I asked quietly, perfectly playing the tragic role of the defeated victim. "It is very simple, Dad," Derek replied instantly, his voice brightening with a wave of false relief. "We are heading to the lawyer's office right now to have you sign a comprehensive power of attorney document. It just gives me the legal authority to seamlessly handle all the complex financial matters properly, manage the various trusts, and deal with the endless hospital billing departments. You will not have to worry about a single difficult thing ever again. You can just rest peacefully at home and focus entirely on your physical health. We will carry the heavy burden for you." It was a brilliantly constructed, absolutely flawless lie. To any outside observer, they would look exactly like the perfect, deeply devoted family, gracefully stepping up to lovingly care for an ailing, grieving patriarch. But I knew exactly what that binding legal document truly was. It was a blank check. The very moment my signature hit that specific piece of paper, Derek would immediately have unrestricted, unquestioned access to legally liquidate every single financial asset. I proudly owned. Rachel reached down to the floorboard and quickly produced a sleek silver thermos. She carefully unscrewed the top, letting a thick cloud of highly aromatic steam fill the enclosed climate-controlled cabin of the luxury vehicle. "Here, Thomas," she murmured affectionately, gracefully leaning over the center console to specifically hand me a small insulated travel cup. "I made your special homemade herbal tea right before we left the house today. It is the exact same soothing recipe I used to make for Martha whenever she was feeling completely overwhelmed and deeply anxious. It will deeply help calm your frayed nerves and quickly clear away that nasty mental confusion you have been fiercely dealing with lately. Drink it all up right now while it is still nice and hot." I carefully took the warm cup from her perfectly steady hand. My own fingers were actively shaking, and for once the violent physical tremor was absolutely not an act. It was pure, unadulterated, sickening revulsion. I stared directly down at the dark, earthy liquid, rapidly swirling inside the small metallic cup. The highly fragrant scent of strong chamomile and fresh mint poorly masked something else darkly lurking right beneath the warm surface. Something subtle, unnervingly heavy, and distinctly metallic. "You should really drink it, Dad," Derek firmly urged without taking his calculating eyes off the busy road ahead. "Rachel spent all morning carefully preparing it just for you. It really helps incredibly with your cognitive stability. You know you desperately need it right now." I slowly brought the thin rim of the hot cup to my dry lips entirely, pretending to take a slow, highly hesitant sip, but I kept my mouth tightly and securely sealed shut. As Derek aggressively navigated a sharp, unexpected turn through the incredibly busy downtown intersection, he cursed loudly at a passing commercial delivery truck, becoming completely and totally distracted by the heavy shifting traffic. Seizing the perfect fleeting moment, I deliberately and forcefully jolted my right wrist. A generous, heavy splash of the scalding hot herbal tea spilled directly over the edge of the travel cup and landed squarely onto the heavy-duty synthetic floor mat, strategically positioned right beneath my expensive leather shoes. I immediately looked down at the dark, steaming puddle. Almost instantly, a faint, undeniable chemical sizzle echoed softly in the quiet, enclosed footwell of the luxury vehicle. The highly resilient synthetic rubber of the expensive protective mat began to severely and visibly discolor rapidly, turning a sickly, deeply pale yellow, exactly where the toxic liquid had directly pulled. The horrifying, undeniable realization violently struck me like a massive physical blow directly to the chest. My beautiful, fiercely intelligent wife did not suddenly die of natural, completely unavoidable causes. Her fatal sudden heart attack was directly preceded by 5 agonizing months of extreme neurological decline, severe, unexplainable joint pain, and profound crippling mental fog. Physical symptoms that perfectly mirrored exactly what I had been actively experiencing for the past 5 consecutive months. Symptoms they conveniently and repeatedly blamed on my advancing old age and my intense blinding grief. I was absolutely not losing my sharp analytical mind. I was absolutely not dying of a broken heart. I was being meticulously, deliberately, and systematically poisoned by them. The rest of the car ride passed in a suffocating blur. I kept my breathing shallow, my mind running complex structural calculations to stop my hands from reaching across the center console and wrapping around my son's throat. They were murdering me slowly, methodically, just like Martha. Every sip of that bitter tea, every gentle touch on my shoulder, was a calculated step in my own execution. Derek steered the heavy vehicle into a dilapidated commercial plaza on the edge of the financial district. I looked up at the squat, weathered brick structure, sandwiched between a failing dry cleaner and a discount liquor store. The faded gold lettering on the glass door read Maxwell and Associates Legal Counsel. This was absolutely not the pristine downtown high-rise where my trusted estate attorney, Gregory Barnes, operated. Gregory had managed my family trust for 3 decades. He was a shark in a tailored suit who scrutinized every single comma. Derek knew Gregory would never allow a transfer of power without a brutal interrogation. So my son bypassed the family lawyer and found a bottom-feeding opportunist for a quick fee. I stumbled slightly as I got out, leaning heavily on the doorframe. Rachel was instantly at my side, gripping my elbow. We walked into a cramped reception area, smelling of stale coffee. A man in a poorly fitted gray suit waited behind a cluttered desk, offering a slick, greasy smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Caldwell," the lawyer said, extending a clammy hand. "I am Richard Maxwell. Derek has told me so much about you. We just have a few standard documents to execute today to relieve your heavy administrative burdens." I nodded slowly, offering a trembling handshake. They guided me into a small conference room. Derek pulled out a chair, pressing his hands firmly onto my shoulders as I sat down. Maxwell slid a thick stack of stapled documents across the scarred wooden table. "This is a durable power of attorney," Maxwell explained, tapping a cheap plastic pen against the signature line. "It grants your son the immediate legal authority to consolidate your bank accounts, liquidate stock assets, and manage all ongoing medical or tax liabilities. Given your declining health, this ensures your vast estate remains fully protected." I stared down at the dense legal jargon. It was an absolute death warrant. The second I signed my name, Derek could digitally wire my entire $40 million life savings to any offshore account he desired. He could drain my retirement, leaving me destitute before the poison finished its grim work. I reached out with a trembling hand, allowing my fingers to hover uncertainly over the pen. Derek leaned in close, his breathing shallow with suppressed anticipation. "Just sign right there at the bottom, Dad," he urged softly, right next to the blue sticker. I picked up the pen, the tip touched the paper, and then I let out a violent rattling cough. I doubled over in the chair, hacking uncontrollably, pressing my forearm against my mouth. I let the pen slip from my fingers, watching it clatter onto the floor. Rachel quickly handed me a paper napkin, her face a mask of manufactured concern. I wheezed heavily, playing the role of a deeply exhausted, fading old man, perfectly to the hilt. "I am so sorry," I whispered, rubbing my chest. "My chest is just so tight today." I looked down at the documents, narrowing my eyes as if the text was blurry. "Derek, I cannot read a single word of this." I must have left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter back home. Maxwell frowned. looking nervously at my son. You do not strictly need to read the fine print, Mr. Caldwell. I have fully summarized the broad strokes for you. It is entirely standard boilerplate text. I shook my head stubbornly, pushing the thick stack of papers away with a clumsy motion. No, I mumbled, slurring my words slightly. Martha always told me never to sign anything I could not read with my own two eyes. I will take these home with me. I will read them over the long weekend when my head is clearer. We can come back next week. The sudden, deafening silence in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I looked up, letting my vacant gaze wander over to my son. Derek was staring directly at me, and for one terrifying fraction of a second, his carefully crafted mask completely slipped. The veins in his neck bulged, his jaw clenched with such pure, unadulterated rage that I could actually hear his teeth grinding together. He looked at me like a trapped animal, actively ruining a highly lucrative slaughter. He wanted to physically grab my hand and force the pen across the paper. Dad. Derek started, his voice tight and dangerously low. We really need to get this finalized today. The tax deadlines are aggressively approaching. Before he could snap, Rachel stepped smoothly in front of him, placing a restraining hand firmly on his chest. She flashed me that sickening patient smile entirely devoid of actual warmth. When, of course, Thomas Rachel cooped gently, gathering the papers and sliding them neatly into a manila folder. You should absolutely take your time. There is no rush at all. We want you to feel completely comfortable with everything. Derek is just a little stressed about the looming hospital bills. That is all. Derek swallowed his visible fury, forcing a stiff, awkward nod. Yeah, right. Sorry, Dad. Take the weekend. We will review it all together on Monday. They drove me back to my sprawling empty house in near total silence. The tension radiating from the front seats was absolutely palpable. I clutched the manila folder tightly to my chest, a physical shield against their quiet, deadly desperation. Every passing mile confirmed my grim reality. The clock was ticking. They needed this money immediately, and my stubborn refusal to sign had just massively accelerated their lethal timeline. When we finally pulled into my long, sweeping driveway, Rachel unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to me with an unwavering, deeply concerning smile. Thomas? I'm actually going to stay the night in the guest room here, she announced smoothly. You had such a terrible coughing fit in that office, and you seem so incredibly frail today. I really want to cook you a hot, nutritious dinner and make absolutely sure you are properly cared for tonight. I would never forgive myself if you fell or had a sudden medical emergency while you were all alone. My stomach twisted violently. She was not staying to care for me. She was staying to monitor me. She was staying to ensure I ingested my daily lethal dose of whatever toxic cocktail she was slowly feeding me. That is very kind of you, Rachel, I whispered weakly, letting her help me out of the SUV. Later that evening, after a quiet, heavily supervised dinner, I retreated to my private study. I sat in my large leather armchair, staring blankly at the dark mahogany desk. Rachel knocked softly and entered, carrying a small silver tray. On it rested a steaming mug of her special herbal tea and a small, unmarked white pill. Derek spoke to your doctor this afternoon, Thomas. She lied, effortlessly handing me the pill. He prescribed a new, highly concentrated vitamin supplement to help strengthen your heart and clear up that nasty brain fog. You need to swallow it right now and drink every last drop of your tea so you can get a long, deep sleep. I looked at the pill resting in my palm. It was completely smooth, devoid of any pharmaceutical markings, a silent, untraceable weapon. I gave her a weak, grateful nod, bringing my hand to my mouth. I tossed the pill backward, but expertly tucked it deep under my tongue. I picked up a glass of water from the desk and took a large, convincing swallow. There, I said, managing a tired, raspy sigh. All gone, Rachel smiled, her eyes tracking the mug of steaming tea. Drink up, she urged softly. I will be right outside in the hallway if you need absolutely anything at all. She turned her back and slowly walked out of the study, pulling the heavy wooden door partially shut, leaving a small crack so she could listen. The moment her footsteps faded slightly down the hall, I acted with swift, silent precision. I spit the dissolved bitter pill into a thick paper napkin and shoved it deep into my trouser pocket. I grabbed the hot mug of toxic tea and moved quietly across the thick Persian rug toward the door. Just outside the study, sitting elegantly in the long shadowed corridor, was a massive decorative potted fern. I leaned carefully through the small gap in the doorway, ensuring Rachel was completely out of sight in the distant kitchen. With a steady, deliberate motion, I poured the entire contents of the steaming mug directly into the deep soil of the large potted fern. The dark liquid quickly vanished into the dirt. I carefully wiped the rim of the ceramic mug, walked slowly back to my desk, and sat down in the absolute silence, now fully prepared to wage a devastating war. I opened my eyes to the pale morning light, filtering through the heavy bedroom curtains. For the first time in 5 agonizing months, the world around me did not spin into a dizzying, nauseating blur the moment I lifted my head from the pillow. I lay perfectly still on the mattress, taking a slow, deep breath, mentally inventorying every single joint and muscle in my aging body, the persistent crippling ache in my knees, the heavy stiffness in my shoulders, and that suffocating mental fog that had relentlessly clouded my daily thoughts were noticeably receding. It was not a complete miraculous recovery, but the sudden absence of that oppressive physical weight was absolutely undeniable. Skipping just one single dose of Rachel's special homemade herbal tea had been enough to grant my body a desperate moment of genuine clarity. I slowly sat up on the edge of the bed, planting my feet firmly on the hardwood floor. My legs did not violently tremble. My hands, when I held them out in front of me, were completely steady. The horrifying reality of my situation washed over me again, cold and sharp. Everything I had been feeling, the weakness, the confusion, the sudden inability to remember simple daily tasks. It was all a meticulously engineered illusion. They were intentionally breaking down my physical structure, dismantling my health day by day, microgram by microgram, ensuring that my inevitable collapse would look like nothing more than the tragic natural decline of a grieving, heartbroken old man. They had done the exact same thing to Martha. They had watched her slowly fade, offering fake smiles and poisoned cups of tea, until her heart finally gave out. I stood up, my spine straightening with a renewed, dangerous sense of purpose. I dressed quietly, choosing a simple pair of slacks and a comfortable sweater, maintaining the visual illusion of a vulnerable, defeated senior citizen. I opened my bedroom door and stepped out into the long, quiet hallway leading toward the main living area. The house was silent, saved for the faint, muffled sounds of conversation drifting up from the kitchen downstairs. As I walked down the corridor, I paused right outside the door of my private study. My eyes fell on the massive decorative potted fern sitting in the corner. Just last night, it had been a vibrant, thriving plant with bright green fronds reaching up toward the ceiling. Now it was a terrifying monument to my son's absolute treachery. The entire plant was completely dead. The lush, healthy leaves had withered into dry, brittle husks. The stems were violently blackened, curled inward, as if they had been scorched by an invisible chemical fire. The rich, dark soil at the base of the heavy ceramic pot was stained a sickly, unnatural yellowish hue, where I had poured the steaming contents of Rachel's mug. The sheer concentrated toxicity required to annihilate a resilient, fully grown plant in a matter of mere hours was utterly staggering. If I had swallowed that pill and drank that tea last night, I might not have woken up this morning. I might have been another tragic sudden heart attack, another convenient tragedy for Derek and Rachel to tearfully mourn at an expensive catered funeral. I stared at the blackened dead leaves, feeling a cold, hollow void where my paternal love used to reside. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the son I had proudly watched graduate, he simply did not exist anymore. He had been entirely replaced by a ruthless, greedy predator, and I was going to treat him exactly as such. I continued down the wide staircase, carefully gripping the wooden banister, and deliberately slowing my steps to mimic a heavy, exhausted shuffle. I entered the bright, sunlit kitchen. Derek was sitting at the marble island, aggressively typing on his sleek laptop, dressed in a sharp navy suit. His expensive leather briefcase rested on the counter right next to him. Rachel was standing by the stove, cheerfully stirring a pot of oatmeal, humming a soft, pleasant melody, as if she had not just attempted to quietly murder her father-in-law 12 hours ago. "Good morning, Thomas," Rachel chirped, turning around with a blinding, practiced smile. "Did you sleep well? I was listening for you, but the house was so perfectly quiet. You must have been completely exhausted." I offered her a weak, entirely vacant nod. "I slept very deeply." "Rachel," I murmured, keeping my voice barely above a whisper, "that herbal tea you made me worked absolute wonders. I feel like I barely moved a muscle all night long." Rachel exchanged a very quick, highly satisfied glance with Derek. Derek looked up from his bright screen, offering me a stiff, completely unsympathetic smile. "Glad to hear it, Dad. We really need you resting and gathering your strength. We still have to go back to the lawyer's office on Monday to get those documents finalized. The administrative delays are getting really frustrating." Before I could formulate a pathetic, compliant response, Derek's cell phone suddenly began to buzz aggressively against the marble countertop. He glanced down at the glowing screen, and his confident, arrogant posture instantly vanished. His face went completely pale, a sheer, unadulterated panic flashing wildly in his eyes. He snatched the phone up as if it were burning his skin. "I have to take this right now." Derek stammered, his voice tight and unnaturally strained. He pushed his chair back violently, practically sprinting toward the glass patio doors leading out to the backyard. Rachel watched the stove. He stepped outside, sliding the heavy glass door tightly shut behind him, pacing frantically across the wooden deck as he pressed the phone to his ear. Rachel frowned, clearly annoyed by his sudden chaotic departure, and turned her attention back to the bubbling oatmeal on the hot stove. "Oh goodness, we are completely out of the almond milk. You like Thomas?" She sighed with exaggerated frustration. "Let me run down to the basement pantry and grab a fresh carton. I will be right back. Do not touch the hot stove." She wiped her hands on a towel and quickly headed toward the basement stairs. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving me completely alone in the spacious kitchen. I looked out the glass doors. Derek was pacing furiously by the edge of the swimming pool, aggressively running his free hand through his perfectly styled hair, his face twisted in desperate, frantic conversation. He was completely distracted, utterly consumed by whatever disaster was unfolding on the other end of that phone line. I turned my gaze back to the kitchen counter. Derek's expensive combination locked leather briefcase was sitting right there, completely unguarded. My engineering background had required me to understand the intricate mechanical vulnerabilities of countless physical security systems. A standard 3-digit combination lock on a consumer-grade leather briefcase was incredibly elementary. It was a simple mechanism that relied on tiny internal tension pins. I moved with swift, silent precision, dropping the frail old man facade instantly. I stepped up to the counter and reached into my pocket, pulling out a small, sturdy metal paperclip I always carried. I quickly unbent the thick wire, creating a rigid makeshift tension tool. I slid the metal tip straight into the tiny gap beside the first numbered dial, applying firm, even pressure to the internal latch. I slowly rotated the dial with my thumb, feeling for the microscopic mechanical click that indicated the internal pin had aligned with the open groove. Click! I moved to the second dial, repeating the delicate, precise process. Click! The third dial rotated smoothly, dropping right into place with a final, satisfying snap. I pushed the brass release buttons, and the heavy leather flap of the briefcase popped open. I did not waste a single second. I bypassed the shiny marketing brochures, the thick financial portfolios, and the expensive pens digging straight into the back compartment. My fingers brushed against a thick, heavy stack of high-quality legal paper bound by a stark blue cover. I pulled it out and quickly scanned the bold, capitalized text printed across the front page. It was a highly modified, legally notarized copy of Martha Caldwell's irrevocable trust agreement. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. This was the master document, the absolute financial core of my entire $40 million estate. Gregory Barnes, my actual attorney, held the original copy securely in his firm's vault. Derek had clearly hired this new sleazy downtown lawyer to draft a series of aggressive, highly illegal amendments to the trust structure, entirely bypassing the established legal protections I had put in place decades ago. I rapidly flipped through the dense, heavy pages, scanning the complex legal jargon with the trained, meticulous eye of a man who had spent 40 years reading dense structural blueprints. I bypassed the standard asset distribution clauses and the real estate holdings, searching specifically for the newly added amendments. I found it near the very back of the massive document. A brand new heavily highlighted section that had absolutely no business being there. It was clearly marked as Section 4B, contingency of spousal survivorship. I dragged my finger down the page, reading the freshly printed text. My blood turned to absolute ice in my veins. The carefully constructed legal wording was undeniably clear, ruthlessly designed to strip away every single protective barrier my estate possessed. I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto the final devastating sentence of Section 4B. I stared down at the crisp white paper, my eyes tracing the heavy black ink of Section 4B. The dense legal terminology masked a brutally clear survivorship contingency, twisted to serve a greedy purpose. Our trust mandated that I retain control of the $40 million estate, with the remainder going to medical charities. But Derek had gutted our legacy. Section 4B stated that if I died within 6 months of Martha, the charity donations would be completely voided. The entire $40 million estate would transfer 100% directly to Derek. He knew a power of attorney could be legally challenged. He wanted permanent, unquestionable legal ownership. He needed me completely gone. I kept my hands steady against the cold granite edge of the kitchen island. I raised my eyes, looking past the modern stainless steel appliances toward the large digital calendar displayed on the wall oven panel. My mind, trained for decades to calculate precise structural loads, instantly ran the horrifying mathematics of my impending death. Martha had passed away 5 months and 2 weeks ago. The 6-month anniversary of her murder was exactly 14 days away. A wave of freezing clarity washed over me, erasing any traces of paternal denial. This was not a vague, open-ended scheme to slowly drain my accounts. This was a highly calculated, meticulously scheduled execution. Derek and Rachel were operating on a strict, unforgiving timeline. Every cup of that bitter herbal tea, every unmarked vitamin pill they shoved into my hand, was perfectly dosed to ensure my body suffered a massive catastrophic failure before that 2-week deadline expired. They needed my heart to stop before the middle of April. If I managed to survive past that 6-month mark, the original charitable clauses of the trust would permanently lock into place forever, severing Derek from the massive $40 million windfall he so desperately needed to cover his illegal offshore debts. They were watching the clock, waiting for the heavy thallium toxins to build up in my bloodstream, eagerly anticipating the moment I would finally collapse onto the hardwood floor, just like his mother did. I took a slow, deep breath, sealing my profound, blinding rage behind a thick wall of unbreakable mental discipline. I had 14 days to turn their lethal trap back onto them. 14 days to systematically dismantle my son's entire life. Suddenly, the heavy glass of the patio door rattled violently in its metal track. Heavy footsteps pounded aggressively against the wooden deck outside. Derek was coming back. His phone conversation had ended abruptly, and his silhouette was moving fast toward the kitchen entrance. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had less than 2 seconds to secure the evidence. I quickly shoved the heavy legal document back into the hidden rear compartment of the leather briefcase. I folded the marketing brochures back over the top perfectly, recreating the messy, unorganized arrangement Derek had left behind. With a swift, precise motion, I pressed the heavy leather flap down. The brass latches snapped shut with a loud, distinct click just as the glass door slid violently open. Derek stepped into the kitchen, his face flushed, and his expensive tie loosened around his neck. He practically threw his cell phone onto the dining table, radiating a highly volatile, nervous energy. His sharp eyes immediately snapped toward the kitchen island. He stopped dead in his tracks. I was standing far too close to his briefcase. My hand was hovering just inches above the polished brass locks. The tension in the room instantly spiked. The air grew incredibly thick and suffocating. Derek's posture shifted, his shoulders tensing as he took a slow, highly calculated step toward me. The mask of the loving, concerned son completely evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a predator protecting its vital secrets. "What are you doing?" Derek demanded. His voice was completely devoid of any warmth, flat and dangerously quiet. "Why are you hovering over my bag?" I did not flinch. I did not step back.